or a real conflict. Because what it is with cyber weapons, so to say, is if you use it, you mostly cannot use it anymore after that. So, but this is also part of mostly of cybersecurity strategies and part of the cybersecurity concept within a country. Cyber espionage, that's really about, intellectual property um, of states trying to get insight in intellectual property or in government documents, for example. And for example, within the Netherlands, the estimation on only intellectual property theft is over 10 billion each year. So this is a major and important topic within the domain of cybersecurity. Internet governance is really about, how do we govern the internet? And there are all kind of organizations more on the technical side who are into this, like the ICANN, for example, the registries, and they make protocols on how the internet is built up, for example, and the rules of the internet. Then you have international cybersecurity. This is about between states. There's a potential conflict in cybersecurity. How do we handle them? So these are talks within the UN, for example, on cyber norms and state behavior. So, and in a way to prevent that that the cyber domain, that conflicts in the cyber domain will will end up in a real war, so to say, or in a physical war. And this process is international is taking place at the UN level, the UNGGE, so it's the UN group of government experts, and the OEWG. So there are some bodies who are discussing these concepts, and also yeah, this is going in a very slow pace, but it's a really important topic. And then we have this sort of cross-cutting, how I see it, sort of new kid on the block within the national strategies. When I was developing the national strategies for the Netherlands around 10 years ago or 8 years ago, this didn't exist, the concept of cyber capacity building. And basically how I see cyber capacity building is more of the practical side. So it's about really about cybersecurity, but it's about how to, set up structures, networks, all kind of capacities that make, in particular, a country more resilient. So this is basically my, if you look at the cybersecurity, it's used by a lot of people, but the question that you have to ask yourself is what do they really mean with it? The concept and the definition differs. That's good to know if you talk with someone about cybersecurity, that you realize that. I will move on to the other one. What you see in particular in most cybersecurity strategies is the concept of a multi-stakeholder approach. What you see here is a picture with the three circles, like citizens, private parties or organizations, and governments. And basically what this picture says is that in cybersecurity, in becoming resilient, cyber resilient, there are responsibilities. Like it's not one party who is responsible, but it's a shared responsibility. Citizens have responsibility for cyber hygiene. So, for example, to renew your password on your computer, take care of your computer, that it will be cyber secure. Private parties also have an accountability for their products and their services, and they have a duty of care to consumers. And government can have different roles. Can be, they can steer, they can give direction by making laws, for example, on cybercrime and cybersecurity, or by facilitating, bringing groups together who have a stake in cybersecurity. In particular, when I was in the government, we on most of the, um, the laws or policies that we made, we included also private sector, because most of the expertise on cyber security is within the private sector. So that's an important, I think, aspect of the multi-stakeholder approach, that there are different responsibility for different stakeholders, and it makes sense to bring them one way or another together. So that's one concept on the slide. The other concept is the triangle that you see. Here you see again the citizens, the governments, and the private sector, so the multi-stakeholder approach. But also you see here is reflected that security is part of a larger paradigm, and it mainly this reflects that security is part of a balance between economic and social benefits, freedom, and security. So if you take, for example, for a government, if you take security measures, it's always in the context of freedom and also economic and social benefits. So it's not a concept in itself, but part of a bigger concept that has to be or a bigger context that is important if you take measures. So this is the multi-stakeholder approach. One other important concept is public-private partnerships, because, like I said, that most expertise, knowledge within on cybersecurity or responsibility is within the private sector, critical sectors like in the energy sector or other sectors. It is important to have cooperation between the government and the private sector. But it's not a done deal, and some countries are better in it than others. For example, what's really important is trust. Trust from the private sector in their government. If trust is lacking, then public-private partnerships are really hard to establish. Also, if you start a public-private partnership, it's good to have shared interests. For example, a certain sector will cooperate with the government if it's also it's also aimed at their interest. For example, to become more secure, to have the right regulation on their sector, for example. Equality. If you're doing a project together, it's important that you are there and with equal partners. So it's not the government who is in your partnership is leading it, but it's a joint endeavor. That's important, and also to get results. So all these conditions are important, and in the end, it's all about trust. And like is and what is important is that you do not have a top-down management approach, but really a culture of dialogue, and that's really hard. but that has to be, brought up. And the other one is on trust. It takes a lot of efforts to build up trust, but like everybody knows, it's also something that can disappear fast. So this is a thing about public-private partnerships within the Netherlands. So I started my career within the Netherlands cybersecurity. We could build upon structures that were already there, that existed in over centuries, sometimes with public-private cooperation, and then it was really easy to bring in the cyber dimension in there. And like I said, so for governments internationally, where there is low trust between the private sector and governments, it's really hard to to come to public-private partnerships. But for cybersecurity, it is a really important concept to get things done. Like I said, because knowledge is in the private is in the private sector a lot. This is an example of public-private partnerships, and also I think of cyber capacity building on a national level. The concept of ISACs. This is a concept that exists in different countries, including the Netherlands, but also in the UK, the US, and other countries. And this is where a critical sector, for example, energy, works together on the concept of cybersecurity. And that means that leading organizations of the sector will come together to share security issues, and it can be in a different way. Sometimes they can and they are exchanging risks they see, and in the end to make the whole sector more secure, cyber secure. In the Netherlands, this is a best practice where we have, I think, several ISACs, over 10, on the different critical infrastructure sectors that are important for national security reasons. For example, in the Netherlands, also water management, energy, electricity, and you have multiple, the financial sector. You have multiple sectors. They come together, people with the expertise, with cybersecurity expertise, to exchange information and to support each other to become more secure. And there's although in the real world they are competitors from each other, oftentimes not on cybersecurity. That's I think the main concept that's behind it. So it's about sharing incidents, lessons learned, best practices to learn from each other. And in the Netherlands, it's sort of coordinated by the government. It's led by the sectors and coordinated by the governments. So this is what in a few slides back, I was touching upon the responsibilities of different actors, and one of the responsibilities of the government is to facilitate. And within the ISAC concept, the government is facilitating. There are some critical sectors, like the airport, telecom, energy, water, nuclear, and that sort of things. And it's pretty well the same for each country. And there can be some differences, of course, but pretty well the same. Another example is the ICT Response Board. Like I said, when I way back, so it's like 15 years ago, this is a concept that was started in the Netherlands. We realized at that time that if there is an incident, a cybersecurity incident, and the government tries to cope with the incident, within the government, the crisis structure consists of different ministries. But there are no, critical sectors within this crisis structure. So that's why the ICT response board was set up. That mainly means that if there is a cybersecurity crisis, within 2 hours, the government can include critical infrastructure experts of critical infrastructure sectors to respond to the crisis. And what it basically is, like if there is in the energy sector, there's a problem, there's a crisis, then a team will be formed with government officials, but also from the energy sector and maybe other sectors who are also involved. And within 2 hours, the response board can give clarity on what's the situation, what are measures that could be taken, and what are the impact of these measures. So this is the advice of the ICT response board, and they practice this with exercises. And this is new because there's no. This is a typical example how old structures with only government officials do not work for cybersecurity incidents. So that's why they have this new concept. So these are some best practices also in private public-private partnerships. Going to cyber capacity building. Like I said, this is a new concept. I think for the last maybe 7 or 10 years, this concept is introduced. I think basically there's no clear definition. It's about, in my view, it's about the practical stuff of cybersecurity, the building up structures, capacities that are not there yet. What I see is that there are different angles to it. Sometimes, in particular, ministries of foreign affairs see cyber capacity building as a, sort of an international angle, to see it as countries supporting other countries, in particular developing countries, for example, with building up, with exchanging expertise and support by governments. So this has a sort of development goal. We also see a concept where this is about projects. Capacity building is seen as projects to involve and to support other countries and companies to internationally. And also it's improved, and another concept is that it is about, improving the resilience of networks and critical infrastructure sectors. So also you see, if you talk about cyber capacity building, sometimes what I see more and more, it's about projects. But when we started cyber capacity building 7 years ago within the GFCE, it was a lot about awareness raising, best practices, what is everybody doing, and that sort of things. But now it's really about projects, getting things done, and it has to do with the cyber domain that's maturing. Let's see, I go maybe some on trends. So what do you see in cyber capacity building? One is that, and that's already taking place over 10 years, is that the field is growing. Cyber capacity building is growing. So there are more and more parties, more and more projects, all kind of things. And that's what you see here reflected in the pic. And the second one is also that there are more and more resources by government, more and more resources involved in cybersecurity. So more actors means more fragmentation, and that's what you see in the cyber domain in general, and in cyber capacity building and projects as well. And I think it's reflected here as well. If you look at 2010 and 2020, here you see, all the different projects take place and also the interactions between them. and then you see how, how the domain has grown and also how complex it has become. And there's where I think the request for coordination comes in. And this is also why, the GFCE was established in 2015 to strengthen international cooperation and collaboration on cyber capacity building. So where is the trend and development cyber? Where is it going to, so to say? And here you see a picture of like two of different scenarios. The scenario of more or less investment and more or less coordination. And I think in the end, the best scenario that we are aiming for is at the GFCE is that there will be more investment in cyber capacity building. So that also means, more projects and more things to be done and more resilient governments in the end. But at the same time, also more coordination. And that's basically what the mandate and the responsibility is of the GFCE when it was established in 2015 to provide the international community with 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 more coordination. How it started, I will skip that one, but in the middle of it, you see the GCCS 2015. So we had a sequence of high-level um, um, conferences starting in 2011 in London, and the last one was in Delhi in 2017, aiming at bringing more international cooperation within the cybersecurity field. And in 2015, we had the big conference in The Hague. And in The Hague, the GFCE was established because everybody saw internationally that the field of the cyber domain got more fragmented, and there was a need for a neutral platform owned by all the parties and countries and also the private sector, that was neutral and that would support practical cooperation. Because in the end, at that time, the UN process got stuck, like, agreements on, how to come to international agreements on cybersecurity got stuck. But at the same time, due to technical developments, the whole domain was changing, and there was a lot of dynamics. So the answer was why we should create or establish a platform where we can practically coordinate with each other. And that's about, cyber capacity building. So the GFC is an international response to a global challenge, and that's the fragmentation. And it's an international platform, practical, like I said, support partnerships, support solutions. Solutions are, all over the world, but people are not aware of it. So it's our duty to see what are good solutions and make them known. Helping organizations and countries in particular to put in place foundational building blocks for it to become more resilient, like a good strategy or an awareness campaign and that sort of building blocks. And it's open to all. And we have some documents to that. Let's see, also considering the time, our mandate. So like I said, strengthen international collaboration on cyber capacity building and expertise. What are we aiming for? Avoid duplication. So that's a coordination question. So if there are, for example, 7 countries who like to support one other country, it's a good thing that they are aware of what their support is. So we do not have like 7 sponsors or countries supporting one country at the same with for example a cybersecurity strategy. That's a waste of funding and time for everyone. So coordination to avoid duplication is important. So we make it, what we do is to bring parties together, and give insight in what everybody is doing. Share knowledge and expertise. So we set up a portal for that, where people can find practical expertise. It's a civil portal, but also to bring with meetings, global meetings, regional meetings, to bring parties together to exchange knowledge. And the other one is matchmaking. So if there's a country who has a particular need on, for example, support to set up an awareness campaign or something, they come to us, the GFC Secretariat, and say like, we have a need, and then we have the structures in place to address these needs to the GFC community, so they can respond to it. So we are sort of a broker between a recipient, member of the GFCE, and the GFC community, who can match with offers for support their needs. So this is basically what we do. To do that, we set up a whole. We started with just members and partners and the secretariat, but over the years we created all kind of mechanisms and tools that will support the community in their efforts to cooperate and collaborate with each other. So we set up working groups on different topics, so where people can come together who would like to give support, people who need support, and also the implementers. And these are the partners. This is the partner community. We set up a civil portal. It's a portal with all kind of knowledge and expertise. We set up a global research agenda, and because there were some gaps that the community felt should be filled. We set up a women in cyber capacity building network, because there was more involvement of women in cybersecurity was needed. So that's how we set up a whole system to support international cooperation. And we as a secretariat are running this system. We are the secretariat of all these different structures, try to make the life of our members and partners a little bit easier. These are some topics. So in 2017, we set up what we call the daily communique. It's a document with all the members to identify what are the topics that we are going to cooperate on, what are key topics for cyber capacity building and our cooperation. And around these topics, we created these working groups. So these working groups have a certain focus. And so these are sort of common building blocks. These topics, you also see them within national cybersecurity strategies, for example. This is what we created in 2017. Now we have added also other topics to it, but there are some basics, like, having a good cybersecurity strategy, doing an assessment. Cyber diplomacy is a new topic that was not in here, but later on added to it. Critical infrastructure, incident response, awareness raising, education on cybersecurity. So there are a lot of topics that are sort of what we see building blocks. The vision behind it is that there is no sort of golden bullet here. So it's not that, if you have, the right, for example, crypto, then the cybersecurity, is solved. The problem is solved. So cybersecurity in itself means you have to take a lot of measures. You have to build up a lot of capacities to make yourself more resilient. And these are some core topics that we see all over the world, and you can see them also in national cybersecurity strategies. So this is the team's topics, and that's reflected in the working group. Let's see. The civil portal I told you about. So what are we doing? We're trying to capture together with the community. And I think now we have around 900 projects. So what are cyber capacity building projects? And then people can find who is behind it, who's running it, from when to when, what are the topics within this project. Also some guidelines and some practical documents are also included in publications that are relevant for cyber capacity building. So this is not an academic portal. This is a practical portal where our members and partners can find practical information that will help them and support them with their efforts for cyber capacity building. So to set up structures and to really, build capacities. So this is the portal. And then maybe a little bit about the GFCE, our maybe lessons learned itself from the GFCE Secretariat. We started off as a global forum, and we still are. But in the end, what we saw was that the cyber domain was maturing, and that when we started in 2015, it was a lot about, awareness raising, who's doing what sort of activities take place. And more, our community is interested in setting up concrete projects to support others. And if you talk about concrete projects all over the world, and we would like as a GFC to have, to add value, to coordinate, then we find out we really have to set up, regional hubs. So sort of we have a secretariat at the global level, but also we set up regional hubs in the different continents with local people to support projects in the region. So we have two layers within the secretariat. One is the global layer that's in The Hague, and now we are in the process of setting up all kind of in the Pacific. We just set it up in OAS, it's the Americas. In Africa, we started 2 years ago. We have a team there, and we will also start in Asia, trying to cover to cover to support coordination basically, and to support projects of others. So when the question is, what are we aiming for with these regional hubs? We try to build a foundation for others. If you start a project, for example, in Africa, what do you need? You start there. Let's say the Netherlands wants to start a project in Africa. They have no idea. They have no network. So that's why we created this network in Africa where others can make use of. That's the Africa, the ACE community, what we call cyber expert community. So if you have a project, you have access to a network, a cybersecurity network of government officials and others where you can make use of. Other one is needs. You can start a project, but mostly you will not really know what the needs are. So we, for the last 2 years, with all the 55 African countries, so I'm just zooming into Africa right now as an example, we collected all the assessments that are there, that have been done, and also did some interviews with these countries to get a sense of what are the real needs in cyber capacity building they have. And this is very useful if you start a project. So mostly how it works is that, for example, the US has some money for cyber capacity building, and they want to start a project in Africa. They want to support them. And then someone said, like, okay, we have some knowledge on strategies, and then they decide, so, okay, so let's start a project on strategies. But the question is if that's the real need of countries. So that's why we started to really, try to support our community to identify the needs of the African countries. And also, and that's a concept of knowledge models, is to package around the different topics that I just showed you, for example, assessments or strategies on these foundational building blocks to um, to package what the GFC community has to offer, because there are like 6 or 7 assessments that are around there. And for countries to be able to, to do a request, it's good that they know what's out there, what they probably can use as an assessment or something else. So this is one thing, and I think there's a fourth pillar that's not in here. But what we try to do with the regions is to, with the region itself, to come up with a regional agenda on cyber capacity building. So so really turning the needs into an agenda. So that's the next step that we are doing. And then if there's a clear agenda, then you can, go to the global community and confront them like, this is what we need, and can you respond to it? So this is what we are doing now. I'm almost done with my presentation. This is, some components of the knowledge models. So very practically, best practices, that sort of thing, case studies, and what's already out there. Some concluding remarks for us to go ahead. One for us is the demand-driven approach. I just told you about the agenda to establish or develop an agenda per region. That's really the demand-driven approach, and it seems like logic, but so far what we have seen is that there are some donors. If I take the example of Africa in this case, that some donors from abroad want to support, but they make up what they think what the need is of African countries, and that's not demand driven. So demand driven means that the needs and also the agenda is set by the region itself. And like I said, the second one is increase the regional focus, already explained. And the third part, and that's more for the GFC itself, is I showed you the ecosystem, with the working groups, and with the research agenda, with the civil portal, and we have some other tools and mechanisms. And we really focus on to strengthen and to mature the ecosystem to support to support our members and partners in their endeavor and international cooperation on cyber capacity building. So this is a little bit, my my presentation, and also about, I touched upon the sort of the fake concept of cybersecurity, cyber capacity building. I think that's important. And also the importance of international cooperation and how we as a GFC try to support the coordination among the different parties around the globe who would like to support each other. Any questions?
Thank you so much for the lecture, sir. Personally, I found it quite satisfying and fascinating. It's really, really good to gain an understanding of what goes on within the engine of cultivating global cooperation for cyber capacity building. We already have a question from Siddhartha. Can you see the chat, sir, or would you like me
No,
to?
I cannot see it. If you can guide me a little bit, it would be helpful.
No problem. I can read out the question.
Yeah.
So Siddhartha would like to know, hello sir, good afternoon. Here is my question. Where does the Dutch government stand on states supporting non-state actors in cyber attacking another state, such as PLA unit 61486, which is supported by the People's Liberation Army of China and is dedicated to cyber attacks on American, Japanese, and European corporations focusing on satellite and communications technology?
Yeah. Okay. I don't know if there are a lot of questions, but I can start with this one.
Okay.
I think it's not about in particular the Dutch, but I think it's more broadly what you see in what you like I said over the last 10, 15 years um, um, the agreement on a global level within the UN is a problem on cybersecurity, and that has a lot to do with different opinions how we look at cybersecurity. One is more the government angle. I think that's reflected by Russia and China on the internet, and it should be like government led, and more of the multi-stakeholder bottom up approach. I think that's also reflected in the UN itself. So in general, what you see is that you have sort of a government led stakeholders, more the multi-stakeholder, and that's more like the Western countries, so to say. And you also have a lot of countries who are sort of in between, so to say. And that's I think a little bit what's reflected also in the discussions there. So yeah, there's a lot of distrust internationally between I think different actors within the world, like the Western world and example China, Russia in the cyber domain. And it's there's a diplomatic approach, that's the UN. I think that continues, but it's a very slow process and with ups and downs. And there is a national approach in making yourself more resilient and um, in yeah in avoiding or coping with certain attacks. Um, yeah, but it is a big issue, and there's not much trust in the cyber domain between some parties. That's right.
Thank you so much, sir. I would like to move on to Hannah's question, if that's okay.
Yeah.
She would like to know the following. Thank you for your lecture. It was really informative. What are the challenges faced in setting up regional collaborations? What mechanisms does the GFCE have to deal with in regional tensions? For example, in the Nile Basin, there are often reports of cyber attacks between Egypt and Ethiopia at the GERD.
Yeah. I can only speak for the GFC itself. So also for us, it's an endeavor. Like for us, what's important is that you have a local team who really knows, how it works in the region, who has knowledge in the region. That's one thing. Neutrality is important. So we as a secretariat, or we are supporting these hubs, trying to be as neutral as possible because we are doing practical stuff, and it's about resilience. So it's good for everyone, so to say. Um, and we try to make it as practical and also to be neutral. Like, although I'm from the Netherlands, I have in my capacity as a director of the GFC, I'm global, so to say, and neutral to because there are also within the GFC, of course, a lot of differences. Like we have like 80 countries being member of the GFCE, a lot of regional organizations. So we have different, and we have to acknowledge that we have different countries. But that's so local is one thing. Um, um, neutrality is very important for us to make this successful. Continuity is important with most projects. Projects start and within 2 years people go. What we try to do with the GFC is to provide continuity. So we try to build a foundation for projects to build upon. And projects will come and will go away, and then the outcome of the project will feed into these communities, and we will capture them so other projects can make use of it. So continuity is also a problem. So we are also trying to get sponsors, countries for, and also private organizations for our hubs, but for the long term. So not like for 1 or 2 years, but for the long term. That's what we're aiming for, and that's very hard to sell sometimes. But we believe in what we do, and so that's also important. So I think these are 3 elements for us to make it successful, but there are more. Yes.
I can imagine. Uh, let's move on to a question by our student AS. Thank you, sir, for your presentation. Question: in cyber capacity building, is there a clear balance between offensive and defensive capabilities?
Yeah, I think in principle it's about defensive capabilities. So we are not dealing with offensive capabilities, even within the domain of the military domain. It's it's mostly defensive capabilities, or it's still a discussion. So for us, we are really on the defensive capabilities of countries, and we haven't included, civil or like the intelligence or the military sector are not really part of the GFCE community. So we have other representatives like, coordinating ministries on cybersecurity, MFAs, that sort of ministries. Um, and that, I think that reflects our mission, that we focus on defense capabilities.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And I believe we still have time for one last question from Taha. Hello, sir. How do you think the global cyber landscape will look like with volatile geopolitical situations such as the Ukraine conflict and the Taiwan conflict and the ever-present Middle Eastern conflicts? To be specific, how would countries cooperate in such geopolitical situations, since digital economy is a behemoth and at the mercy of network security?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. Is what I like. If I compare it like 7 years ago, I think we were really aiming at the sort of one global cooperation mechanism. And I think you have to be honest, like what's happening for the last 2 years, like we will see distrust between, different camps or different coalitions. And I think we will see more and more cooperation within certain coalitions. So I see more, I think the political um, power shift that you saw from, one country you sort of ruling the world to different countries at the same time is also reflected within cybersecurity. And so I see stronger coalitions, but less trust between different coalitions. That's what I see happening now, and hopefully, of course, we will in years to come we can turn it into one one global coalition that will cooperate more and more with more and more trust. But that's something to build on. That's our mission. But this is what I see. We reflect also in cybersecurity what's happening in other fields, and also how the power structure in the world is like.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for being so generous with your time. We have a lot of students thanking you in the chat and expressing that this was a really important lecture to them. And I would like to join them in expressing that. I found it quite enlightening. And thank you again for your time. And
Okay.
I'm sure all of us learned a lot today.
Okay. Thank you all for your attendance, and hope to see you soon somewhere.
Thank you
Okay.
very much, sir.